Oh boy, do I have a lot to say about Trix. If you've seen my video on Richard, you could probably guess that I'm not a big fan of Trix, but I do want to be impartial as much as I can be and give a fair shake to this character. And I do appreciate what she brings to the show. I think that she illuminates a lot of the generational trauma that this show explores, and I think she adds layers to Richard and Emily's character. So let's get into it. Trix's background. We get quite a few details on Trix's past. Trix was born as Lorelai I in 1917. She studied at the Sorbonne in Paris and at Oxford in England. She also cared for wounded soldiers that were shipped back to the United States during World War II. Trix met three US presidents, Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon. Rory mentions that there's actually a photo of Trix frowning at Nixon as if she knew that Nixon was up to something. Richard says that Trix was an established equestrian, a distinguished patron of the arts, and world famous for her masquerade balls. Trix married her second cousin, Charles Abbott Gilmore. After Charles passed away, Trix moved to London, and she did not come back to the United States for 20 years. Emily and Richard would visit Trix once a year in England. Lorelai mentions that that is because Trix doesn't like to travel, which is different from what we hear later on. At her funeral, her cousin Marilyn says that Trix loved going to exotic places and she would drag Charles around Egypt. Richard also confirms that Trix used to love traveling. I think this is something that maybe changed in her character, that perhaps she used to love to travel, but after her husband passed away, she lost that desire. Trix's character profile. Trix takes a lot of pride in the Gilmore name, and I think that stands out a lot about her. One of the first things that she says to Rory is that Rory must have Gilmore blood because the Gilmores are always healthy, they never get sick, which is kind of ironic given the fact that Richard has experienced more health problems on the show than Emily has. Trix also chastises Richard when she finds out that Rory wants to go to Harvard, so Rory must continue on with the legacy. She also chastises Richard when she finds out that Lorelai's inn is struggling. And I think it's very notable what she says.
We have a reputation to uphold. How would it look if a Gilmore goes out into the business world and fails?
So she's upset with the fact that a Gilmore is going to fail at life, not because her granddaughter is struggling. Where have we seen that before? And I also think it's very interesting that Trix said that she never wanted to remarry because that would be a dishonor to her late husband. And we could take this as a sign of the fact that Trix really loved her late husband, and that's why she would never want to dishonor him in that way by remarrying. Or we could look at this as a sign of the fact that she really prides the Gilmore name, and she would never want to do anything that would possibly damage or diminish the legacy of her family. And I think this takes on very interesting undertones when we find out that Trix actually married her second cousin. So I see Trix as a very no-nonsense kind of woman. I think she respects jokes, but she has her limits and she never laughs. We see a few times that she acknowledges when Lorelai makes a joke and she actually compliments Lorelai on them, but there's no smile on her face, there's no laughter. I think she sees humor as a sign of intelligence, but she doesn't appreciate humor in the same way that we see other characters appreciate humor. Trix is also very practical when it comes to having fun. She lets Rory go to a winter carnival because Rory's young and she should enjoy her life, but she doesn't let Lorelai go because Lorelai has had enough fun in her life. Richard also says that Trix was never a musical woman. She never liked music because for her, music was way too frivolous. Trix is also very business savvy and she understands finances. And this is where I'm going to give Trix credit where it's due. I think this woman understands money, and I think she understands it on a very intuitive level. Trix rented her Connecticut house to Corn while she was living in London, and for me, it goes to show that this is a type of woman who understands how to maintain wealth once she has it. Trix also understands business. When Lorelai opens up the Dragonfly Inn, Trix asks Lorelai a bunch of questions, and the questions that she asks are very pointed. It's clear from her questioning that Trix herself understands the process of starting a business. She knows that Lorelai's projected timetable for breaking a profit is very ambitious. She also knows how hard it is to get a contractor to stick to a projected end date. It's also worth mentioning that Trix can tell right away that Lorelai is hemorrhaging money. She could see it on Lorelai's face, but also I think it's because Trix has an intuitive sense for money. She understands how all of this works. She can feel it. She's very smart when it comes to money. Trix also says that she helped out Richard when he made a poor financial investment in a paper company. First, this goes to show that she already understood what good investments are back in the day. She knew how to advise him, and she was the one who bailed him out. She was handling the money. And on this point, Trix admires hard work and self-sufficiency. She is elitist, but I don't think that she's elitist in the same way that Richard is elitist. And this is where I think I kind of changed my opinion on Trix a little bit, because she really holds hard work and self-sufficiency in very high regard. When we first meet Trix, she asks Lorelai what has she been up to since dropping out of school and getting pregnant, and we see that Richard has a very angry look on his face. But Trix does not seem to be as fazed. She doesn't seem to be as bothered by the fact that Lorelai is a single mother running an inn. That she respects. Even though she doesn't like scandal, the fact that Lorelai is independent and hardworking is a major mitigating factor. And I don't think that Richard sees this in the same way. So Trix has a lot more respect for someone who may perhaps be in a working class, but she still sees the family name as the most important. We see this throughout the show that Trix treats Lorelai and Rory very nicely, and she seems to admire that Lorelai is a working woman, and she doesn't seem to mind that Lorelai is single. She makes comments, but they're not in a derogatory way. We later find out that Trix actually has a picture of Lorelai in her entryway, so her cousin Marilyn at the funeral says that Trix would point to the picture of Lorelai and say, very proudly, "This is my granddaughter, she's single." And we could read this as Trix trying to be a matchmaker for Lorelai, or as a sign of the fact that Trix, deep down, is proud of the fact that her granddaughter is so independent. Trix is also an asshole, and I wish I had different words to say it, but that's just my feeling. I have no better words to express what Trix's personality is. She's kind of a dick. Trix makes passive-aggressive comments at Emily all the time. I don't think there's ever a time when she actually says something nice or neutral to Emily, and that's the problem. She doesn't bother to say anything that's not an insult. Everything that she says to Emily is an insult, and it's a very backhanded insult. The icing on the cake is that Trix does this very publicly. She insults Emily not only in front of her own family, but also in front of her friends. And she's just so incredibly rude from the moment that we meet her. The first scene, when Emily walks into the room with Lorelai and Rory, she says, "Look who's here, Ma," and Trix does not even want to raise her head. That is just so incredibly entitled and just condescending. Trix also does this with other people, not just with Emily. There are times when she actually snaps at Lorelai as well. For example, when she says, "That's enough joking," when she gets mad at Richard for the fact that Rory wants to go to Harvard. Another example is with Jason. When she meets Jason for the first time, she notes that he's very young, and then when he tries to offer a gift, Trix starts attacking Jason, asking him why he would ever offer a gift. Now, I understand that perhaps it makes sense for Trix to be confused and to wonder why he would offer a gift, but there's really no reason to start attacking an individual for trying to offer a gift. He was being polite, and the way that she responds, it's as if he tried to poison her. It just doesn't make sense to me why she would be so overtly mean to someone who she just met. Later on, when Trix is talking to Lorelai about the inn, Jason steps in to defend Lorelai, saying that bed and breakfasts can be great money-making machines, and then Trix takes another jab at Jason.
Yes, and wonderful places to put all those French antiques.
My theory is that Trix distrusts Jason because of the fact that he's so young. Because Jason is Richard's business partner, she may worry that Jason would try to push Richard out. But that does not justify the level of rudeness that Trix displays. Yet another example is Trix's very strict eating schedule. When she goes out to the Dragonfly Inn, it really bothers me the way that she decided to write out a timetable for when all the courses should be brought out. It's based on her digestion every 12 minutes. And I just see it as so entitled to go ahead and set this timetable for the kitchen for people who are working very hard. Something else that I think is very curious about Trix is her philosophy on lending money, and this is where I'm going to be reading way too much into things, so please correct me if I'm, off my rocker here. But Trix considers loaning money to be a dirty business. She says it's distasteful and I don't care for it. She quotes Shakespeare saying, "Neither a borrower nor a lender be." This makes me think of Elizabethan times, and during that period of time, and again, I'm reading way too much into this, but English society was very anti-Semitic, and it's interesting that she quotes Shakespeare because during this era, Christianity was a dominant religion and lending money with interest was condemned by religious authorities. Stereotypes associated with lending money was tied to specific groups, and Jews were often targeted as money lenders during this period. So money lending during Shakespeare's time was often seen as a low-status occupation. And I'm not trying to say in any way that Trix is anti-Semitic, but the idea of lending money as a dirty business and quoting Shakespeare made me think of Merchant of Venice and the associations of anti-Semitism during this period. Let me know if anyone else had that feeling or it's just me and I'm going way too down the rabbit hole. So for me, what solidifies Trix's status as a complete jerk is actually what Marilyn, her cousin, says at her funeral. Marilyn says that when Trix and her husband Charles went to Egypt, they got into an argument over pyramids because Trix wanted to see the pyramids. She then took a camel and rode off on that camel, dragging the camel's owner behind for over a mile. She says that the man almost died. Is anybody surprised by this? Okay, one more thing, and then I'll move on from this topic, but there's one line that Trix says that just confuses me.
I've ordered a car. Women shouldn't drive.
What does that mean? What does she want a woman to do? Hop on a horse? Walk several miles? Trix, what's up with that? I don't get it. I mean, it sounds like pure privilege talking. Okay, so I have a headcanon for Trix. Trix was born in 1917, which was during the women's suffrage movement in the United States. I think that Trix's mother might have been a suffragist, and it might have been Trix's mother that instilled a sense of admiration for women who are independent and who work hard. Trix's impact on Richard. We can tell how Richard feels about Trix. Richard dotes on Trix all the time. He always hands her a drink right away. He calls her a saint. He talks about how much he respects and admires the woman. He says that she's the strongest woman he has ever known. He also says that he learned everything from Trix. I think that the way that Trix raised Richard is the same way that Richard was raising Lorelai. I think that Trix was a pretty cold mother. Her love was conditional. She believed that Richard has to be a go-getter. So from very early on, Richard had learned that he had to be successful in order to get his mother's love. So the way that Richard dotes on Trix all the time makes me think that he spent his entire life looking for his mother's approval. All the things that he believes in, his belief in the family, his belief in status, his belief in money, I think comes from Trix. I also think that his idea of the fact that what Emily does is trivial also comes from Trix, because Trix, again, is a very no-nonsense woman, and she sees a lot of things as trivial, and I think that Richard has internalized that belief. I also think that Richard became a very ruthless businessman because of Trix. I think he needed to be successful in order to show that he met her standards, and he had to do whatever it takes to get there. So he's willing to screw over other people because he learned that that's okay. I also think that Richard was a bully because of Trix. Richard had no problem throwing a guy out of a window because Trix had no regard for human life. What would we expect from a woman who's willing to drag a guy by a camel for over a mile? Now, that does not excuse any of Richard's behavior. I do not want to say that this is an excuse. The way that Trix raised Richard does not excuse what Richard does later on. However, it does provide an explanation. Trix's impact on Emily.
Have fun. No one appreciates your sarcasm, young lady.
Trix's impact on Emily is very obvious, so I'll keep it very brief. What I think is curious is that Trix not only insults Emily, but sometimes I feel like she treats Emily like a servant.
Emily, perhaps the girl would like a drink. Emily, please get my coat. I will meet you outside.
Another example is when Trix kicks Emily out of her own house because Trix is planning a gathering that night with her friends. Another very interesting point is that Lorelai was named after Trix, so Emily was raising a child named after a woman that hates her. I wonder what psychological impact that has had on Emily. Okay, so why doesn't Trix like Emily? I've read a few theories online, so I decided to go through them. Theory 1. Trix wouldn't like anybody that Richard ended up with. Under this theory, even if Richard ended up with Penelon Lott, Trix would have ended up hating Penelon Lott because no one is good enough for her son. I think that's a pretty good theory. I could definitely see Trix as the type of person who would, at the end of the day, reject any woman because she would think that no woman is good enough for her son. Theory 2. Trix doesn't like Emily because Emily is more independent and outspoken than Penelon Lott, and Trix doesn't like that type of personality. For this theory, I don't feel like it's that strong because we don't really know that much about Penelon Lott. We don't know if she is as outspoken. We don't really know much about her at all, so it's plausible, but for this one, I don't think there's enough evidence. Theory 3. Emily is the other woman. When Emily met Richard, Richard was almost engaged to Penelon Lott. Richard says that they actually had invitations sent out. So Trix doesn't like Emily because Emily stepped into the engagement. And so Emily was the other woman. She broke up a couple that was about to get married, and Trix sees this as very wrong. So, this is another interesting theory. However, I have not seen enough evidence from Trix suggesting that she's bothered by the fact that Emily broke up an engagement. What I like about this theory is that it makes me think about the cheating that happens in the family. Richard was engaged when he met Emily, so he left a woman to be with Emily. He then met up with that woman for years while he was married to Emily. I think that Richard has proclivities towards cheating, and Rory displays that very similar behavior. My theory on why Trix doesn't like Emily is because Trix doesn't see Emily as a go-getter. I think that Trix has very high standards for women. I think that Trix believes that women have to be smart, independent, and very business savvy. And I feel like Trix doesn't see what Emily does as important or valuable, which is where I think Richard gets it from. Based on what I've seen from Trix, it feels like Trix really was running the show. She was in charge of everything in the home and a lot of things outside of the home, and I think she has that same expectation for Emily. So that's my take on Trix. If you have your own headcanons for Trix, I would love to hear about them. I would also just love to hear your thoughts on Trix if there's anything that I missed, or you have more, redeeming qualities about Trix that I did not cover. I guess my thing with this character is just that it's so hard for me to watch someone being very mean on screen, and this is not an attack on the actress by any means. Actually, I think the actress did a very good job, which is why I don't like this character. I think she really stepped into the shoes of this particular character. As always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for making it to the end. I appreciate you.